But I feel like the body right now is being treated very poorly because this is not a genuine offer. It's just a lie. Because if it was genuine, it would have the consensus items, and it doesn't. And so that I find to be really upsetting, because when I come up here and I just waste time, you know that that's what I'm doing. If I put an amendment up there and it's genuine, I tell you it's genuine. If I put an amendment up there and it's just to take time, I tell you that. I thought this was going to be a real debate about Senator Geist's amendment and her concerns with the non-consensus items. And then I come to find out that she doesn't put all of the consensus items in here. And it's 9:20 at night, and the staff has to stay here after we're gone for much longer. And then they have to be here in the morning when we come back. This is rude and it is disrespectful. Senator Pansing Brooks, would you like the remainder of my time? I will yield my time to Senator Pansing Brooks.
Senator Pansing Brooks, 2:30.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. So a number of people have talked about 605. I was here when we passed 605, and it is correct. A lot of the suggestions of CJI were not CJI. What's the other group? Anyway, we're taken out. What was the, oh yeah, CSG. All these acronyms. So we're taken out of the bill, the final bill, and I know that because I had an attorney come to me my first week in the legislature when I first arrived in 2015 and said, you know what's been taken out and taken out in a way that was not forthright or and was done in a secret way? I said, what? And it was the 1/3 rule. So I have worked to bring that 1/3 rule back every year, but I brought that year, and I had all the people on CJI on the committee absolutely furious at me. What are you doing? What are you trying to do? We've already come to the agreement that we aren't going to put that one part in. There are parts that we've agreed to and parts we hadn't. Well, I had no idea because I wasn't on the CJI committee. So I was just coming in as a new senator. And it's a good idea. And it was a part of the original part of the CJI recommendations. There were multiple things that were part of CJI. So to compare this and say, oh, well, 605 didn't work, you're right. It didn't work because we didn't do all the requirements. And guess why that is? Because there were a number of people who are the same people today saying, oh no, we can't do this. We're not going to be tough enough on crime. We have this continuous vicious circle. It's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. That is exactly what's happening. And good luck, everybody. And I'm sorry to the state of Nebraska. We really, really did try. You're going to have to keep paying tax dollars. You're going to have to keep paying for expansion of prisons because the people in this body do not want to be smart on crime. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Pansing Brooks and Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Senator Bostman, you are recognized.
Thank you. I'll yield my time to Senator Geist because I would certainly like to hear her reply. Thank you.
Senator Geist, 455.
Thank you, Senator Bostman. And I would like to reply. Consensus items are one thing in concept. When they're written out in a statute, there is room for disagreement. I can also tell you that never once, ever in this body, can anyone look me in the eye and say, I have lied about anything, ever. If I make a misstatement like I just did earlier, I correct it. So I resent that comment, Senator Kavanaugh, because that's not true. I will explain the things I left out of my amendment. One of them was burglary. We had a discussion about why we only have one burglary statute, which covers both business and residence, occupied, not occupied. What we didn't discuss is lowering the penalty. That's what was in the statute. That's why I disagreed with it. I think you can look across the country at businesses right now that might be a little incensed if we lower a penalty if they're broken into, and we don't think that's important enough to charge for it. Second thing was for theft. We had a discussion about whether or not it's good to have a 10-year look back for habitual criminal or habitual theft, or how this is going to be looked at. There was some discussion about that. I left it out so that we could talk about it and get agreement. Remember, I said we put things in the parking lot. There were things that weren't resolved. I wanted to resolve it. The next thing is for drug court. And this allows no exception for any Class 4 felon to be allowed in drug court. Do you know that drug court has a prohibition for violent offenders? They're not allowed. It's an exclusion. There are some Class 4 felonies that can be violent. That needs to be discussed. It hasn't been. That's why I left these out. There is room for discussion, room for compromise. So I would urge you to understand that compromise has been on the front burner since this started, on my front burner. There were issues of discussion. There are valid points, and they should be addressed. They should have been addressed before this week. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Geist. Senator McAllister, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Once again, good evening, colleagues. What I'd call inconvenient facts, I'm going to read off 3 or 4 that really mattered to me. The problem: Nebraska incarceration rate has increased 17% since 2011, while the national rate has steadily decreased. The state corrections budget has grown to account for a swelling prison population. However, arrest rates decreased and crime rates remain relatively steady. Why is that? Second, time spent in prison has increased 38% over the last decade for all offenses types, and grant rates for parole have decreased from 78% to the grant rate in 2018 to a 58% rate in 2020. We were talking about theft. Nearly 30% of the prison admissions for theft in 2020 were felony shoplifting. Lastly, mandatory minimum sentences in Nebraska have doubled in the past decade. A few inconvenient facts. I'm going to ask Senator Geist a few questions, but I need to start off by telling her I respect the position she's taken. I respect that, and I understand that this is a difficult proposition for her.
Senator Geist, would you yield?
Yes, I will.
Senator Geist, if in the wisdom of the legislature included all of the recommendations from CGI, what harm would result?
I believe it's a risk of public safety.
Say that again?
I believe it's a risk to public safety.
Would you
Not all of the recommendations, some of the recommendations.
Would you
be a risk.
concede that many states haven't experienced an increase in crime or reduced public safety when they've accepted the recommendations?
I think if you look across the states from 2019 to 2022, they're all up in crime.
Thank you. What value do we place on the effort that CJI made in Nebraska?
I appreciate their efforts. I had some questions. I've asked those questions. I don't know that we always came to an agreement. I know we didn't always come to an agreement just because I continue to ask questions. But continuing to ask questions doesn't disparage their efforts. I appreciate the length of time they spent. They were always available, always pleasant, always willing to talk.
Thank you. Do we have an authoritative source that can dispute some of the findings that CJI made? Can we cite those sources?
I'm sorry?
Yeah. What authoritative sources can you cite when you refute some of the recommendations from CJI? Is it just your feeling, or is it
No,
just?
actually, the sources that I engage when I have objection to some of the non-consensus items are people that do the job.
I see. President Trump, in his last year of office, made some rather startling recommendations on criminal justice reform. Could we simply adopt all those recommendations that came out of the Trump administration?
Well, but you're talking the difference in federal law and state law, so they don't always coincide. So I would say that he did some good things. I'm not
1
sure I
minute.
would agree with all of those. I was not one who followed everything President Trump did. But again, we have state law dictating was federal law. And so with those recommendations, I would have to see what state law provides
Thank
and
you.
what the difference would be.
We're going to build a $275 million prison. That's in the budget. And that'll give us a net another 1,500 beds. How big a prison do you really want to build?
You know, to be honest with you, the only reason I want to build a prison is to give inmates a better place, so they're not living on top of each other, to make a safer place for our guards, to have better technology so we need fewer guards, and to actually have classroom space. I have no desire to build a ginormous prison, but I do think we need to accommodate our population, and we have not done that, and we have not done that for years.
Time, Senator. Thank you, Senator McCollister and Senator Geist. Senator Greigert, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield my time to Senator Slama.
Senator Slama, 455.
Thank you, Senator Greigert, and thank you, Mr. President. I rise today with my same position I've had throughout the evening. We need to attach Senator Geist AM 2337 for LB 920 to be an acceptable form for me. I think we're having a mainly good and substantive debate, and I'd like to get to an article I think that really gets to the core and the results and what our expectations are as we're going into this process, because Utah has been brought up as an example of a success story, and that hasn't really panned out. So I'd like to read from this article. It's from KUTV, published Thursday, April 1st, 2021. Nearly 1 billion new prison will have fewer beds based on flawed justice initiative. In 2015, Utah lawmakers decided to base the plans for a new prison and its location on the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, more commonly known as JRI. It's a state law that made changes to Utah's criminal justice system and was approved by lawmakers in the 2015 session. It reclassified first and second convictions for drug possession from a third-degree felony to a Class A misdemeanor, with the expectation that JRI would reduce the prison population and recidivism rates, thereby saving taxpayer money. Critics say JRI and their plan is far from success. In fact, many law enforcement leaders statewide say JRI is a, quote, public safety nightmare. We've put some people on the streets that probably should not be on the streets. It's the section that I'm reading from here. A 2020 performance audit from the Office of the Legislative Auditor General to the Utah Legislature was an indictment against JRI. It showed recidivism rates among low-level, nonviolent drug offenders. JRI's target group increased. In a separate study called the Project Gateway Report, commissioned by Governor Spencer Cox's transition team, the results were just as bad. That report showed a serious uptick in violent crimes, a marked increase in the number of parolees who absconded and are considered fugitives, and skyrocketing recidivism rates. It also showed the state was slow to provide treatment to offenders under JRI and identified weaknesses in sex offender treatment. This section is entitled, "Who Needs to Be the Victim of Trial and Error? Who Deserves to Be a Victim of Trial and Error? Nobody," said Jensen. He says law enforcement warned legislators, and he personally testified multiple times during hearings at the Capitol before JRI was passed into law, but they didn't listen. Boots on the ground said in 2015, and we'll say it again today, it's not going to work in its current form, Jensen said. Senator Todd Wheeler was not on the Prison Relocation Commission, but as a member of the Senate Judiciary, Law Enforcement, and Criminal Justice Committee, he followed the work of the Prison Relocation Commission. He agreed to speak about the decision to relocate the prison near the airport and the issues with basing the decision on JRI, something that had not been proven at the time, well before Stevenson ultimately agreed to speak to 2 News Investigates.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. This section is labeled, "If we got this one wrong, it was a mistake that I think was based on the best data available at the time." That's from Senator Wheeler. Legislators in Utah reviewed information from similar initiatives in other states before JRI went into effect. We asked Wheeler why the commission would base their decision on something that wasn't proven. Because they were looking at success from the other states where the similar programs have been implemented, he said. And I'll continue on this on my next turn at the mic. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Matt Hansen, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll yield my time to Senator Lathrop.
Senator Lathrop, 455.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. Good evening once again. I kind of want to bring this, well, first of all, it's hard for me to know when I don't know the article that Senator Slama is reading from, where it came from, who wrote it, what their circumstance is. I'm not saying she's not reading it accurately or that it's not a real publication. I have no way of knowing. I do know that when we handed out this packet of information, in there is a summary of the experience of other states that have been through this. Utah has seen a decrease in their crime rate by 26%, while its arrest rates have decreased by 19% and imprisonment rates have fallen by 4%. That's the data. That's the data. I know that CJI is still involved in Utah. I want to bring this back to, it feels a little bit like a sidetrack when we start trying to dispute the data or dispute assumptions that we need to make in order to move forward. We talk about bringing in experts for this and experts for that and showing us the way on child welfare, and we had those people here. And each of the 3, well, all of the members had an opportunity to propose different proposals. Their group could have come up with different ideas, and those ideas would have been subject to the larger group. And if they're part of the larger group discussion or an option, they would have been in here and scored. Here's the challenge. If you have an idea, or if you had an idea, we needed to see it before now so it could be scored. Is it supported by data or wishful thinking? To simply say, well, I don't want to change any sentence structure, or I don't want people to be parole eligible sooner, but I don't want to build more prisons either. I want to say this in the most respectful way I can, but it's wishful thinking. And wishful thinking isn't going to solve $1 billion problem. It's not going to solve $1 billion problem. CJI, that process allowed the subgroups to offer options, right? Senator Geist served on a subgroup, Senator McKinney was on one, and I was on a third. Each one of those subgroups talked about, well, what can we do to fix the problem? And all of them agreed stopping jamouts. But these ideas that somehow if we build a prison, it will solve the overcrowding problem because people will have better circumstances and the guards will have a better job conditions. That doesn't solve the problem. Go back to the front page. Go back to the front page. This graph demonstrates $1 billion problem. This is time for serious discussions. A serious discussion, and it's not the time to be discrediting CJI or that organization. You know, when the final report was written, there was a pause put on it because there was
1 minute.
Thank you. Senator Geist had some concern with it. Ultimately, that report was issued. I'm puzzled by the attempt now to discredit the data, to discredit CGI's work in another state, to say things that are disparaging about them. It's a distraction. And this problem is too expensive, it's too important to be distracted by attempts to discredit the messenger. This is our data. It was derived from our experience in Nebraska, and these are ideas not that CJI brought, but that members of the working group put on the table. That's what we're considering tonight, and this should be a serious discussion about a way forward that will address the increase in our capacity and the trajectory of the increase in our capacity. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Senator Slama, you are recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening again, colleagues. I want to continue on with this article from KUTV. My position on LB 920 is unchanged. If AM 2337, which contains 17 of the 21 parts of LB 920, I will support the bill, but only if that amendment is attached. And to just clarify Senator Lathrop's question about what KUTV is, it's the CBS affiliate in Salt Lake City, so it's like actually it is a news source. And that's why I think that getting into this article is so valuable, because Utah is 7 years out from implementing these recommendations. So they're a few years removed. They can let these kick in. And they're seeing results that aren't positive. And this is as they're debating a new prison. Like, there are a lot of stars that align in the Utah case compared with Nebraska. That's why I think it is valuable to read this in. So again, this is an article entitled "Nearly $1 Billion New Prison Will Have Fewer Beds Based on Flawed Justice Initiative." It's from April 1st, 2021. And I'm towards the end of the article, I think, thankfully for some people in the body. And I'm on the subsection entitled "Utah Taxpayers Association Weighs In." Rusty Cannon is the vice president of the Utah Taxpayers Association, a watchdog organization that looks out for taxpayers. And his quote is, "Anytime you're basing future policy on a guess or an estimate, it can be a little dangerous," Cannon said. "The question is, how expensive is it going to be to fix that problem?" That's the question 2 News Investigates asked the Utah Division of Facilities Construction and Management, which is in charge of construction of state buildings. How much money will it cost to expand the prison? Mary Lee Richens, Deputy Director of the Department of Administrative Services, issued this statement. I can't answer the cost of expansion because there are simply too many variables. For example, maximum security expansion is more expensive than general population expansion. If we were to expand the sex offender units and we had to do within the current prison fence, that is tricky and a much slower process than if we can expand outside the fence where the construction site presents less of a security risk. Women's expansion is more expensive generally than men's. We would have to consider whether additional supporting service construction would be needed, like another dining room. If an expansion needs to happen, the details of what will be included with the expansion and how much escalation in construction has occurred between now and then will affect that cost. 2 News Investigates asked Cannon if it was bad policy by lawmakers since they can't even begin to put a price tag on what it would cost to expand a prison that's not yet complete. So the side note of this, and it was at the beginning of the article, Utah is proposing building a new prison. They knew that they were going to need to build to. They knew that they were going to need to build a new prison. Sorry, it's been a day. But they lowered the number of beds in this new prison because of the CJI recommendations. Now they're in a position where they've underbuilt because their recidivism rates are up, their violent crime rates are up, according to this article. And I know Senator Lathrop
1 minute.
has a different take on it. So now they're being forced to expand a prison that they're still building. Thank you, Mr. President. And this is coming at a $1 billion cost. And we can get hung up on those numbers, but at the end of the day, $1 billion is the cost of a large maximum security prison in this day and age. And we've been put in this situation because we've traditionally underbuilt our facilities in the state of Nebraska. The last new major facility we've built was at the turn of the century with TSCI, and we were underbuilding then. So of course we're in the position where we're looking at a $1 billion price tag. It would have been much cheaper to address this in the early 2000s, but we didn't. So this is the situation we're in, and I hope we take lessons from the situation that Utah is currently finding themselves in. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator McKinney, you are recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise again in support of LB 920. Since I last got off the mic, in which I opened up the discussion to where are the solutions? If we don't like how consensus items were written, what were the counters? How do we counter those? How do we get to solutions? What other bills are out there to explore that possibly we could agree on? And I had a couple bills that, some people might say I tried to go too far, too extreme. I don't think they are. I think they're very reasonable, and that's up for debate. But there's LB 980, which would provide for release for medical treatment, change provisions relating to medical parole, and provide for parole eligibility for persons serving life imprisonment. Last summer, there was an individual in NSP that was terminally ill, and he couldn't go home because he wasn't close to his 2-year parole eligibility, and the department and the parole board played ping pong with his life, and he ended up dying before he could get released to his family. So that's why I put that component into LB 980. Secondly, after visiting our institutions and talking to those individuals inside, just like the circle of concerned lifers, I have come to an understanding of, there are individuals inside of our prisons that has taken every class, peer mentors, doing everything right, that don't really need to be inside prisons anymore. And according to our Constitution, only treason and impeachment disqualifies you from being eligible for parole. So why not allow individuals after 25 years that are serving life terms at least a review from the parole board, so the parole board could review them. And if they aren't doing the right things inside, they don't get out. But there's a lot of individuals, especially those serving long-term sentences, that are doing the right things that I believe we should give a chance. And I will always stand up for that. So that's an option that we could talk about. And then there's LB 1154 that I introduced. It would change provisions relating to good time, parole eligibility, and the service of sentence of incarceration outside a department of a department facility, and require 80% of eligible committed offenders to be placed in community corrections or transitional housing. I decided to introduce this bill after visiting a transitional housing facility in Hastings. And after talking with some of the people there, some of the people that are that were formerly incarcerated and the people inside the facility, I'm like, why don't, and they had beds available that for whatever reason, the Department of Correction isn't sending people to. Why don't we set a minimum percentage of individuals that are eligible for community and force the Department of Corrections to put those people in community? It is people right now in a maximum security facility in Tecumseh that are currently eligible for community corrections, but we're not putting them in community corrections, and we wonder why we have prison overcrowding. Think about that. That is the issue. And if you actually took the time to talk to those inside and also the guards, you would understand that a lot of people that are inside currently don't need to be there.
1 minute.
And they don't pose a risk to society. The data, whatever data you want to read, doesn't support the fact that if we release somebody that served a long term or terminally ill or older, they don't reoffend. The percentages are super low. We could find data from wherever we want to find data, but we can't ignore the facts. And I just want to throw out those two bills, LB 980 and LB 1154, because I'm still waiting on more people to stand up and offer up solutions, counters to why you don't like the consensus items. If you don't like them, come with a counter. Don't just say no and I don't like it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Moser, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I've been listening to the discussion here and trying to learn more about this. There's a pretty good learning curve to understanding the issues on this bill. But we're here at almost 10 o'clock at night, and one of the reasons we're here at 10 o'clock at night is we've had some filibusters, unsubstantial filibusters, just filibusters to kill time without any purpose that's illustrated in the filibuster. And that's why we're here working late at night, trying to make up for lost time. So I'm willing to be here to listen to the debate, and I don't think we should be assessing blame on whose fault that it is that we're here at 10 o'clock at night. And if we are going to start assessing blame, it's going to get ugly. So I'm going to go and give the rest of my time to Senator Geist. Thank you.
Senator Geist, you are yielded 350.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Moser. In response to Senator McKinney's challenge of bringing something to the table, one of the things that I know he and I know Justin Wayne, Senator Wayne and I have talked a lot about is community corrections. I'm a big fan. I think that's something we can utilize more. I would be and have been available to discuss and work on that. I think that is an arena that we can grow in. I know some of us off on the side have also had discussions about a different way of doing things. Now, 920 is a framework. It is not the only way that we can do corrections in this state. I've talked so many times, not on this mic, but in front of other people and with other boards that I happen to be on, that I think there is a different way of doing things. One of those could be upon arrest, people are evaluated, and if their underlying condition is mental health, or addiction, then we divert them from incarceration and force them into treatment. The problem right now in our state is we don't have facilities with which to do that. We do have ARPA funds, and maybe a good thing to look at next session would be, can ARPA funds be used to set up such facilities and staff those? It's a possibility. It's an out-of-the-box thinking. But I would also contend that if we got a handle in this state on our mental health problems and our addiction problems, and sometimes those are one and the same person. But if we had more access, more treatment, that could be a quick way to reduce our prison population. Because right now, our prisons are inhabited by people who are addicted and people who are seriously mentally ill, because we simply have nowhere else to put them. And that's a big challenge we have in our state. And I'll also say that our COVID that we've recently gone through is only going to exacerbate that problem in the future. So that to the degree that we get a handle on that now, I think is a degree that in this arena,
1 minute.
correctional arena, we will also be more successful. One other thing I would just like to say is that we want to think about, okay, what's going to happen if we don't pass all of these consensus and non-consensus items? Well, CJI themselves told us that going forward, it will be necessary to set realistic expectations of what comes next. This report and the work that went into developing it should be viewed as an important step toward achieving a more just, equitable, and fair system to address problems of crime, behavioral health, incarceration, community supervision, and recidivism. So they even recognize that doing this, to whatever degree, I'm sure they're thinking of all the things.
Time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Geist and Senator Moser. Senator Flood, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, members. It's almost 10 o'clock. Half of the people in here have head colds and are coughing and feel frumpy, but I appreciate the discussion. Having been a member of this place on and off since 2005, I want to call attention to one of the challenges that was really rising in the first part of the century, and that is sex offenses. I note in Senator Lathrop's handout that 1/5 of our prison population is the custody of sex offenses, and our daily population averages around 1,068. I can tell you, when I came into the legislature the first time, we had a situation, I think it was here in Lincoln, where a developmentally disabled defendant acted on impulses and sexually assaulted a child in a Lincoln school. Then Governor Johans, at the time, really began an assessment of the whole system. And through his leadership, we developed the child advocacy centers, which were non-existent before his tenure, and now we have them all over the state. We also created special custody residential services for developmentally disabled sex offenders. I don't know if it was at Beatrice or Hastings. And we ultimately passed the Sex Offender Commitment Act, which allowed for civil commitment for sex offenders to place them in our regional center system. And the reason I bring this up, and I think Senator Geist alluded to this just a moment ago, when she essentially described civil commitment for somebody facing a drug offense. And my question is that an answer? Do we look at civil commitment for someone that has a drug problem that they refuse to address inside our programming, and then involuntarily place them in a custody situation until they resolve that? What I find interesting is I think both sides of the issue here both want to see the problem get better, want the individual to find the treatment and the help they need. And I wonder if that's not a way forward. The other thing I wanted to comment on is that I have had a a question about drug courts since they were started in Nebraska. I don't know if we want judges deciding whether or not somebody should go to jail that day because they break an offense if it violates the separation of powers. But it's hard to argue that we haven't seen some really positive developments there. I am pleased to see in the CGI report, and Senator Geist, I think, agrees with this, that we should be expanding these across the state. It does not make sense that if you're charged with a class 4 felony for possession of a controlled substance in Douglas County, that you have the opportunity to go through the system and have that purged from your record. But if you do that in Wheeler County, there is no program and you face a felony for the rest of your life. I do think that's unequal justice, and I'm pleased to see the CGI report addresses that. Those are just my initial comments. I want to be constructive. I think Senator Lathrop, the Judiciary Committee, Senator Geist, everybody cares deeply about this. And hey, if we all agreed, we wouldn't be doing anything substantial. The fact that we have these serious disagreements means that from this could come very good positive results, and I'm not discouraged a bit. I'd give the remainder of my time at his request to Senator Wayne.
Senator Wayne, you are yielded 120.
Thank you. I'll be really brief. I'm glad to hear that both Senator McKinney and Senator Geist agree on community kind of correction. So if you look at the chart that Senator Lathrop handed out, I have a bill, LB 334, that would create community corrections across the state. That means immediately, if we take some type of advantage of that bill, you can move 800 people out of corrections immediately. That also increases the local communities and give them transitioning back to their local communities. The second thing I wanted to mention just real quick, Senator Geist, I agree with you. And here's how it works real quick. Anytime you're charged with a felony in Douglas County, you get a pre-trial or pre-release number. So somebody interviews you from probation about basically you get interviewed before you go for your arraignment. I will commit dollars to starting a pilot program to also screen them for mental health and drug addiction at the same time they're being pre-screened for pre-trial release immediately when they are arrested. So I think that's a pilot program in and of itself that will give us significant data that can change the course of where we are. So I agree with both Senator McKinney and Senator Geist, and I think at least there's one agreement we can move forward on tonight. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. And Senator Flood. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just one. Senator Coulterman would move to adjourn the body until Thursday, March 31st at 9 o'clock a.m.
Members, you've heard the motion to adjourn until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, say nay. We are adjourned. Thank you, Senator Wayne. And Senator Flood. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just one. Senator Coulterman would move to adjourn the body until Thursday, March 31st at 9